Call the member for Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Transport Safety Investigation Amendment Bill 2012. The amendments that have proposed to the Transport Safety Investigation Act 2003 give relevant state and territory government ministers a capacity to request that the Australian Transport Safety Bureau conduct an investigation in their jurisdiction. The amendments also propose to clarify that the ATSB's capacity to conduct investigations within, to or from a Commonwealth territory and to facilitate access to onboard recording and restricted information in accordance with these regulations. The first two proposed amendments relate to the implementation of commitments contained in the Intergovernmental Agreement on the Rail Safety Regulation and Investigations Reform, or the IGA as it's called. Now, the IGA was signed by COAG back in August 2011. In addition to the separate establishment of a national rail safety regulator, the IGA commits to the ATSB to becoming the National Rail Safety Investigator, which is, as my colleague just said, that's something that we're looking forward to. The ATSB has been investigating rail occurrences under the TSI Act since July 2003. Now, the ATSB, as an independent Commonwealth statutory agency, is separate from the transport regulators, policymakers and service providers, and we think that that independence is a good thing. With the ATSB's brief is to improve safety in the aviation, marine and rail industries through its independent investigations of transport accidents, the recording and the analysis of safety data, and by fostering safety awareness. It's important to note, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not a function of the ATSB to apportion blame or to provide a means for determining liability. Under the provisions of the Transport Safety Investigation Bill, it supplements the introduction of the national transport reforms agreed by COAG back in 2009. These national transport reforms will see a national regulator for heavy vehicles, rail safety and maritime safety, therefore reducing the regulatory burden on businesses and consolidating the 23 existing regulators into 3 national regulators. These national transport reforms are anticipated to provide productivity gains over the next 20 years of around $30 billion. The bill implements commitments contained in the Intergovernmental Agreement on Rail Safety Regulations and Investigation Reform, which was signed, as I said, by COAG in 19th of August last year. As part of the Intergovernment Agreement, the ATSB will become the National Rail Safety Investigator. This bill, together with the Rail Safety National Law, which was passed by the South Australian Parliament in May 2012, will replace 7 regulatory bodies and 46 pieces of legislation. The National Rail Safety Regulator will be operational from the 1st of January 2013. To fulfil its role as the National Rail Safety Investigator, this bill gives the ATSB the power to investigate matters referred to it by state and territory governments. This means for the first time the ATSB will have the investigatory role over incidents on metropolitan passenger lines and various state and territory freight rail networks. However, this will only be available for incidents referred to it by the investigations by the relevant state or territory government. And the Northern Territory spans across 20% of Australia's landmass, a vast space, remote, with hundreds of kilometres of land separating townships. For the Northern Territory, strong and reliable transport systems are required primarily for economic development. Most of the Territory's population reside in Darwin, but many choose to live in rural and remote communities across the region. Therefore, Territorians rely on the major transport services such as the Australia-Asia Railway, which links Darwin to Adelaide, for fast, efficient transport of passengers and freight. Thousands of people travel to the Northern Territory each year on board the GAN, which boosts tourism and provides critical links to the continued development of the Northern Territory, given its remoteness to the rest of Australia. The Transcontinental Railway, which was completed in January 2004, which established this vital link between Adelaide and Darwin, as I've said. In 2010, Genesee and Wyoming started operating the Takula to Darwin line, which allows for regular train services each week. Now, for the decade ending December 2011, the Northern Territory has had 24 train derailments. This total is quite minor compared with New South Wales, who encountered the most in the country with 497, followed by Queensland with 370 and Western Australia with 213. However, for the Northern Territory, with only one rail line, any derailment has a significant impact on the Territory. For the same period, the Northern Territory has had 1.95 derailments per million kilometres travelled, significantly less than Tasmania, which has had 10.93 derailments per kilometres travelled. Interesting facts there, Ms Deputy Speaker. These derailments occurred in the Northern Territory during the construction period of the Alice Springs to Darwin Railway, at the time when it was not part of the defined interstate rail network, which I said was prior to January 2004. There have been 5 rail safety investigations carried out in the Northern Territory during the 1st of January 2002 to the 31st of December 2011. As I said, given the remote location of the Northern Territory, train derailments have a major impact on food and produce supply. They also threaten the environment, particularly if a train derails carrying toxic substances, such as was the case in December 2011 when a freight train derailed in floodwaters just near Katherine at Edith River. Extreme weather weakened a bridge and caused the freight train to derail. This disaster saw about 12,000 tonnes of toxic copper concentrate spill into the Edith River, which was being carried in tarpaulin-covered carriages. The derailment was the second to happen in just over a year on the same line, and the clean-up was time-consuming. At the time, the tracker operator Genesee and Wyoming were not able to access the site safety, and as a result, water testing was carried out for some time. A similar derailment occurred near Tennant Creek on the Darwin to Adelaide Railway in June this year. The derailment occurred when one set of wheels came off the loaded mineral wagon. It was the third derailment in 19 months, and the incident left around 240 passengers on the GAN headed for Darwin in limbo. Concerns have since been raised about the safety of transporting radioactive material and toxic chemicals. It could only be a matter of time before an environmental disaster occurs. The Territorians also rely heavily on the transport of goods from south to north in the Northern Territory. When a derailment occurs, as I said, signs go up in local supermarkets warning shoppers of delays in getting fresh food and produce. Investigations and work-safe guidelines into derailments are therefore crucial towards preventing and safeguarding against similar disasters from occurring in the future. I welcome that the bill gives state and territory government ministers responsibility for a right to request the ATSB conduct an investigation into their jurisdiction, and clarifies the ATSB's capacity to conduct investigations within a Commonwealth territory. In accordance with the intergovernmental agency, which states that states will pay for the ATSB for investigative services in their jurisdiction, or if they already have an established investigator, as is the case in New South Wales and Victoria, they'll meet their own costs and contribute to the investigation services. This amendment clears the way for a national confidential reporting scheme to be established through future regulation under Section 20A of the Transport Safety Act. This new scheme will replace the existing aviation scheme established under the Air Navigation Confidential Reporting Regulations 2006, the existing maritime scheme established under the Navigation Confidential Marine Reporting Scheme Regulations of 2008. Importantly, it will mean that for the first time there will be a confidential reporting scheme for safety incidents into the rail industry. As my colleagues have said, we welcome this legislation and we think that it's important that reliable and appropriate transport is critical to the development of the Northern Territory now and into the future. Given our proximity from major markets in Australia, our industries like mining and tourism rely heavily on the transport of passengers and freight to continue to contribute to the growth of our region. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.